Minas Tirith, originally named Minas Anor, is a fictional city and castle in J.R.R. Tolkien's Middle-earth writings. It became the heavily fortified capital of Gondor in the second half of the Third Age. It was originally built to guard the former capital, Osgiliath, from attack from the west, but became the capital when Osgiliath fell into ruin following the Kin-strife and the Great Plague. It is often referred to as the White City and the City of the Kings. The Rohirrim sometimes translated this into their own language as the Mundburg. In the climax of The Lord of the Rings, the city comes under a very large and determined attack by the allied forces of Mordor. Description: the name Minas Tirith means the Tower of Guard, or the Tower of Watch in the Elvish language Sindarin. It was originally named Minas Anor, the Tower of the Setting Sun, in connection with Minas Tirith, the Tower of the Rising Moon. Minas Tirith was later conquered by orcs from Mordor and was renamed Minas Morgul, the Tower of Black Sorcery. Minas Tirith was built culminating in the citadel at the summit. Each of the 7 levels stood 100 feet higher than the one below it, each surrounded by a white wall, with the exception of the wall of the first circle, which was black. The outer face of this outer wall, the lowest, was made of black stone, the same material used in Orthanc. It was vulnerable only to earthquakes capable of rending the ground where it stood. Each wall held a gate, and each gate faced a different direction. Great Gate equals, the Great Gate was the main gate on the first level of the city of Minas Tirith. It was in the city wall or Othram facing eastward across the Pelennor fields toward the Anduin. In front of the Great Gate there was a large paved area called the Gateway. The roads to Minas Tirith met here, including the North Way that joined the Great West Road to Rohan, the South Road to the southern provinces of Gondor, and the road to Osgiliath. The Great Gate was very strong. Constructed of iron and steel guarded by stone towers and bastions. The iron doors of the gate rolled back to open. Passwords were required to enter the Great Gate and each of the 6 other gates of Minas Tirith. The Great Gate was breached during the War of the Ring. Sauron's forces under the command of the Witch King of Angmar besieged the city on 13th March. Before dawn on 15th March, the battering ram Gronn smashed into the Great Gate 3 times while the Witch King spoke words of power. As if stricken by some blasting spell, it burst asunder, there was a flash of searing lightning, and the doors tumbled in riven fragments to the ground. The Witch King rode through the gate where Gandalf awaited him, but then the Rohirrim arrived and the Witch King went to fight them in the Battle of the Pelennor Fields where he was slain. A temporary barricade was erected in place of the Great Gate. After the war, on 1st May, Aragorn received the crown of Gondor in front of the gate and then entered the city. The Great Gate was rebuilt of mithril and steel by Gimli and dwarves of Erebor from the Lonely Mountain who had settled in the Glittering Caves. Other gates equals, the gates of the 2nd level through the 6th level were staggered at different positions of the wall. The 2nd level gate faces southeast, that of the 3rd northeast, and so forth. This measure was designed to make capture of the already heavily fortified city even more difficult. Also, a spur of rock, the summit of which was level with the city's uppermost tier, jutted out from the hill in an easterly direction, dividing all but the 1st level into 2 parts. On the saddle between the city and Mindolin was Rath Da'anen, where the tombs of the kings of Gondor and their stewards were built. It was reached by a door in the 6th level, which was almost always closed and hence called Fen Hollen. The 6th level also contained stables for riders, and the famed houses of healing. The 7th gate led to the citadel. It faced eastward in line with the Great Gate, which was 700 feet below. The 7th gate could be reached through a sloping tunnel delved into the spur of rock that jutted out of the eastern face of the Hill of Guard. The keystone of the tunnel's archway was carved with the head of a crowned king. Guards of the citadel manned the 7th gate. Pelennor Fields equals, the Pelennor Fields were the townlands and fields of Minas Tirith. The name Pelennor means fenced land in Sindarin. It is pronounced with the emphasis on the 2nd syllable. After Minas Tirith had fallen and been renamed Minas Morgul, the Pelennor Fields were surrounded by the Great Wall of Ramazekka, to prevent an invasion. This wall was in disrepair shortly before the War of the Ring, but was rebuilt in time on the orders of the steward, Denethor II. The East Gate and accompanying watchtowers of Ramas Eka were known as the Causeway Forts and were the strongest section of the entire wall. In total the wall consisted of 3 main gates: north, east and south. During the War of the Ring, the Pelennor Fields were the location of the largest battle of the Third Age, the Battle of the Pelennor Fields, when Sauron's orcs and evil men overran the Ramas Eka by blasting through it and besieged the city. The siege was broken by the arrival of the Rohirrim, though their king Thor-copyright Odin was slain in the battle. After the War of the Ring, the Ramas Eka was rebuilt by the dwarves of Aglarond, led by Gimli the dwarf. Facts equals, the seventh wall contained the citadel with the White Tower of Icthelion, which was 300 feet high, so that its pinnacle was 1,000 feet above the plain. The Seeing Stone of Minas Anor rested in a secret chamber at the top of the tower. In a court before the tower grew the White Tree, the symbol of Gondor. The topmost level also contained lodgings for the Steward of Gondor, the King's House, Merathron the Hall of Feasts, barracks for the guard of the citadel, and other buildings for guests and other workers. The first level included an inn, the Old Guest House. It was on the wide paved street called Lampright Street, which led to the gate. Map number 40 in Barbara Strachey's Journeys of Frodo is a plan of Minas Tirith. Pages 138 and 139 in Karen Wynne Fonstad's revised The Atlas of Middle-earth show a different plan of Minas Tirith. They are at variance with each other, as the only authoritative maps by Tolkien are just sketches. In the book The Return of the King, the guard of the citadel, of whom Beregond was a member originally, was assigned to the highest circle of Minas Tirith and protected the Hall of the King and the Houses of the Dead. Peregrine Took was eventually assigned to serve with the guard. History Early history originally known as Minas Anor, the Tower of the Sun, Minas Tirith was built in SA 3320 by Anarion, younger brother of Isildur and second son of Elendil, High King of Anor. Osgiliath rebuilt the city in TA 420 as a summer residence, and it became the capital of Gondor in TA 1640, when King Teirendor moved the king's house from Osgiliath following the Great Plague, which devastated the population of the much larger and populous old capital. In TA 2002, the White City's companion city, Minas Ithil, Tower of the Moon, on the borders of Mordor, was captured by the Nazgul and renamed Minas Morgul, Tower of Black Sorcery. Minas Anor was renamed Minas Tirith, meaning Tower of Guard, to indicate that since the fall of Minas Ithil, Minas Tirith assumed the role of guarding Gondor against Mordor's forces. For the next 1,000 years, the two cities were in a stalemate, with neither able to topple the other. With the rebuilding of the Dark Tower and the open return of Sauron, the forces of Mordor gathered their strength to topple Minas Tirith in the upcoming War of the Ring. The War of the Ring TA 3018 3019, Minas Tirith is said to have had less than half of the population which could have dwelt there at ease. Many of the buildings had fallen into ruin and disrepair, a sad yet fitting picture of Gondor in those latter days. Ramas Eka, in the latter part of the Third Age, Minas Tirith and its lands were surrounded by the Ramas Eka, a fortified wall encircling the Pelennor Fields and meeting up with Osgiliath, where the Causeway Forts were built on the west bank of the Anduin and garrisoned. As told in The Return of the King, the Ramas proved an ineffective defense due to the overwhelming orc legions of Mordor. After a defense lasting less than a day, the orcs blasted breaches in the wall and laid siege to the city before the Battle of the Pelennor Fields. However, this proved to the detriment of the orcs when the forces of Rohan arrived. 4. As noted by King Thar copyright Odin, they could have held the Ramas against Rohan's attack. Siege Faramir and the garrison were unable to hold Osgiliath and the Causeway Forts against the overwhelming forces of Mordor and were driven back with heavy loss. Leading the rearguard against the onslaught, he was wounded and nearly slain, but the cavalry charge of Prince Amrail of Dol Amroth and Gandalf saved him, and the counterattack allowed the rest of Gondor's soldiers to reach the safety of the city. Minas Tirith was besieged by troops of Mordor, the Easterlings and the Haradrim, and the land fell under the darkness generated by Mordor. Significant damage was done to the first circle of the city, but the enemy was unable to break through the wall except in one place. the gate of the city was broken by a combination of the battering ram Grond and the Witch King's sorcery. However, the Witch King was halted at the entrance by Gandalf. During the siege, the House of the Stewards in Rath Nen was destroyed by a fire lit by the steward Denethor in suicidal despair at the illness of his son Faramir. The timely arrival of the Rohirrim led by King Thar-Copyright-Odin forced the armies of Mordor to face the newcomers instead of assaulting the city. The resulting Battle of the Pelennor Fields took place on March 15, 1319 in the fields surrounding the city. Despite heavy losses, Minas Tirith itself was not seriously threatened again, and the battle was won by Gondor and its allies from Rohan and Gondor's fiefs. On May 1, 1319, King Elisar's coronation took place on the plain outside Minas Tirith. He then entered the city as king. Minas Tirith is known to have stood firm well into the Fourth Age. Gimli the dwarf and some of Durin's folk used mithril, a nigh indestructible metal, to replace the gates that had been broken in the War of the Ring. The dwarves also improved the layout of the city's streets. The elves planted trees in the city. In his time the city was made more fair than it had ever been, even in the days of its first glory. And it was filled with trees and with fountains, and its gates were wrought of mithril and steel, and its streets were paved with white marble. And the folk of the mountain labored in it, and the folk of the wood rejoiced to come there. And all was healed and made good, and the houses were filled with men and women and the laughter of children, and no window was blind nor any courtyard empty. And after the ending of the Third Age of the world into the New Age, it preserved the memory and the glory of the years that were gone. Source: it remained the chief city of Gondor, as it is not actually known whether Osgiliath was ever rebuilt. Minas Ithil, however, was destroyed by Elisar, king of Gondor, soon after the War of the Ring. The eagle who brings the news of Sauron's defeat to Minas Tirith refers to the city as the Tower of Anor. The eagle might have been speaking poetically, but as of the Rings of Power and the Third Age in the Silmarillion says, the city is referred to Minas Anor again after Sauron's overthrow. Concept and creation: notes made by Tolkien on a map found in 2015 indicates that Minas Tirith was inspired by the Italian city of Ravenna. Portrayal in adaptations: Tolkien's description of the physical layout of the city of Minas Tirith itself is followed relatively faithfully in Peter Jackson's film The Lord of the Rings, The Return of the King. Jackson's version interprets the top of the rock as flattened and paved, and also the location for the coronation of Aragorn. As with most other landmarks in the film, the city is portrayed as relatively isolated. The absence of these features is mentioned on the original DVD commentary. Portions of Minas Tirith were constructed as full-scale sets, and the whole city has a very large, highly detailed miniature or bigature by Weta Workshop. A remarkably detailed three-dimensional digital model, for CGI shots, along with the whole of its surrounding environment including the Pelennor Fields and Mindolin, was created by Weta Digital. The set was built on the foundations of the disassembled Helm's Deep set. Canonically, in total the city is about 1,000 feet tall. Above the citadel a banner of the stewards floated 1,000 feet above the plain. The towering bastion of stone, shaped like the keel of a ship, which rose from behind the great gates on the first level to the citadel on the seventh, was 700 feet tall, and the Tower of Icthelion was 300 feet tall. According to the non-canonical New Line book The Lord of the Rings, Weapons and Warfare, the height of Minas Tirith to the top of the Tower of Icthelion, is about 1,000 feet, and the city is almost 0.75 miles across. In the Atlas of Middle-earth, predating the New Line films by over a decade, Karen Wynne Fonstad estimates the diameter of the city to be somewhat smaller, 3,100 feet for the first circle of the city. In the complete Tolkien companion Minas Tirith is described in the same way, but is depicted without the rock jutting from the citadel. In the novel, the outermost walls of Minas Tirith were black and virtually indestructible, like the similar black surface of Orthanc, as they were built by the Da'an Nadain before their craft waned in exile. Tolkien says only an earthquake or similar seismic convulsion could cause them significant damage. Jackson depicted all of the walls as white, and many of them were easily destroyed. In the films, the towers of Minas Tirith are equipped with trebuchets. However, This kind of siege engine is not specifically mentioned in the book. The book also mentions that the engines in the city had insufficient range to hinder the assembling of the enemy's catapults, while in the movie at least one catapult was destroyed by a direct hit. According to the making of featurettes on the extended edition DVDs, the appearance and structure of the city was based upon Mont Saint-Michel, France. In popular culture, on August 1, 2015, a group of Tolkien fans from Worcester, UK, created an Indiegogo crowdfunding page with the aim of creating a real-life version of Minas Tirith. Entitled Realise Minas Tirith, the group, led by project manager Jonathan Wilson, sought pledges amounting to £1.85 billion. Reception. Roger Ebert referred to the city in his review of The Lord of the Rings, The Return of the King as a spectacular achievement, and showcased the filmmaker's ability to blend digital and real sets into one piece, and comparing it to the Emerald City from The Wizard of Oz. In the video game Lord of the Rings, Conquest, players in the Evil campaign can destroy the city. References. External links: Minas Tirith at the Encyclopedia of Arda.